My name is Mara Kensington, 34, managing operations for 3 tech complexes in Denver while sleeping in the converted garage behind my brother's house. And the introduction barely settled before my phone lit with a fraud alert asking whether I approved an $18,500 charge to Oceanic Voyages. The number pulsed like it had been waiting for the exact second. Drew told me earlier that family pulls together when the stakes are high. A line that now fit too neatly with the drained balance staring back at me. The cold in the garage tightened when I opened my banking app and saw everything gone under a single transfer that matched the same voice he used last night when he joked that my condo savings were better used by someone who actually had a future to build. I stepped into the crisp Denver air, remembering the one thing none of them bothered to notice, which was the crumpled $2 lottery ticket they tossed toward my plate while telling me to try luck since steady work clearly wasn't doing enough for me. I unfolded it beneath the street lamp and traced the confirmed numbers worth $100 million in a silence that didn't tremble, then slid it deep into my boot where no one would think to look. The echo of Drew insisting earlier that I should stop hoarding money like it means something nudged me toward the bus schedule pinned beside the garage door. I walked back inside only long enough to take my keys. Feeling the steadiness that rose after the alert exposed exactly how far they were willing to reach into my life. The sound of Gerald's voice from last night telling me to drop my attitude and wash the dishes if I planned to stay under his roof still hung in the air with the same weight it carried then. I locked the garage behind me with the single thought that tonight would be the last time anyone in that house mistook my quiet for permission. The house in Aurora carried the scent of roasted herbs drifting through the foyer as Gerald pointed at the entry rug and warned that if I planned to track in slush, I could circle around back like someone who understood her place. And the veneer of hospitality slid clean when Drew added that showing up in work boots proved I still hadn't figured out how to present myself. I hung my coat near the banister long enough to hear Linda call from the dining room that gratitude would make the evening smoother if I stopped acting overwhelmed by simple family expectations. A phrase she shaped with the same precision she used when correcting furniture angles. Janelle lifted a glossy travel brochure toward me and announced that she was headed to the Caribbean because everyone pitched in the way family should, making the laugh between her and Drew land with a weight meant to remind me who they believed the outlier to be. I stepped into the kitchen when Linda gestured at the stack of dishes and mentioned that the caterers had mixed up timing so I could help balance the chaos, while Drew leaned against the counter, remarking that I didn't need to rush home since my condo dream was still a fantasy built on pennies. The clatter of plates followed me as I worked through the sink, listening to their toasts in the next room about new beginnings that apparently required my silence more than my presence, with Gerald's voice drifting in about how responsibility wasn't optional when family invested in something meaningful. I dried my hands, remembering how Janelle had earlier waved her phone to show cabin upgrades, remarking that support goes both ways. And the line threaded itself into a knot that tightened each time the laughter echoed toward the kitchen doorway. When the house finally quieted, I walked to the entry to collect my coat, pulling my phone from the pocket to check the deposit for my condo fund, and watching the screen flicker as the balance registered 0 beneath a transfer tagged with Drew's name. I stood still long enough for Linda's earlier reminder about gratitude to scrape against the reality on the screen, then opened my messages to tell her the money was gone, only to read her reply, insisting I stop being dramatic because Drew was investing for the good of all of us. The words thinned the air around me as I stepped onto the porch, recognizing the same tone she used before dinner when she told me to smile because family energy rises from cooperation, and the phrase folded neatly into the cold, settling across my shoulders as I walked toward my car. The drive away from the house stretched across the dark edges of Aurora, while the last trace of Linda's message, telling me to stop being dramatic, repeated against the empty dashboard. And the words tightened as I replayed how easily she dismissed the 0 on my screen, as if loss were an inconvenience rather than theft. I pulled into a frozen parking lot long enough for the quiet to settle around the truth that Drew's transfer carried the same tone he used earlier when he bragged about directing family resources toward people who actually push us forward. The cold seeped through the car door as I leaned back and admitted into the silence that if this was how they measured loyalty, then the debt they kept naming had never belonged to me. I stared ahead until the frost blurred the windshield and remembered the day my aunt mentioned that Gerald hadn't lost his shop to save me during childhood illness, but had buried it under overdue bills. And the memory pressed harder now that the transfer to Drew made its own argument. I whispered into the dim cabin that maybe the story about sacrifice had survived only because I carried it for them. And the weight of that line shifted when I pictured Gerald insisting I show gratitude by washing dishes in the middle of a catered dinner. The evidence on my banking app settled into its own clarity as I exhaled and let the quiet answer for me. I reached for my bag with a steadiness formed somewhere between the fraud alert and Linda's reminder that cooperation defined family. And the contrast made the decision feel sharper than the cold rolling through the windshield. I told myself that silence had kept me surviving, not protected, and the line landed the moment I opened the car door into the night. I stepped onto the frozen asphalt knowing the threshold had already broken. And the first breath outside made room for the thought that whatever happened next would not be built on their version of what I owed. The glass-walled office on 17th Street felt steadier than the car I'd sat in hours earlier. And I placed the validated lottery receipt on the polished desk while explaining that anonymity wasn't a preference but a requirement, because they cannot know what I'm holding until every door is closed. Ronald Weber leaned forward when I added that I needed a legal structure capable of absorbing transactions without exposing me. And the suggestion of forming Granite Ridge Holdings emerged with the same calm precision he used when noting that my parents' home in Aurora was 30 days from foreclosure. I let the information settle before telling him that clearing their debt wasn't my goal. And the line shaped itself cleanly when I added that control of the property mattered more than rescuing anyone from consequences they chose. Weber opened a file with the foreclosure timeline while I traced the corner of the receipt. And he explained that a cash-for-keys transfer could be executed before the bank formalized auction, which meant you can acquire their rights directly if they believe you're offering a lifeline. I nodded when he outlined how the shell company would appear as an unrelated buyer, allowing the deed transfer to bypass any suspicion from Gerald or Linda. And the strategy took its full shape when he clarified that possession terms could require them to vacate immediately. The framework aligned too easily with the last words I'd read from Linda about gratitude and cooperation, and the echo sharpened the path forward. I unlocked my phone and placed it on the desk to start the fraud report, stating that an unauthorized transfer of $23,500 had originated from a device I didn't control. And the operator confirmed that linked accounts within the bank's network would be frozen pending investigation. Weber glanced toward the screen when the operator added that the hold would restrict cards, transfers, and withdrawals. And the timing pressed itself into the moment with a certainty I hadn't felt earlier. I ended the call with the quiet awareness that the freeze had already begun. And the evidence of the drained balance paired with Drew's earlier bragging formed the only justification I needed. Weber prepared the documents for Granite Ridge Holdings while outlining each step of the acquisition, and I agreed to every detail shaped on the page because the house that once defined my place in the family now marked the first threshold I intended to reclaim. I gathered my things as the afternoon light thinned against the windows, and the contrast between the alert from the bank and the silence from my family traced the beginning of something I could finally name. I walked out of the office knowing the law would do what apologies never had, and the cold outside carried the same clarity as the plan forming beneath my steps. The blizzard rolled across Colorado by dawn, muting the city under white sheets, while my phone pulsed non-stop with messages from Drew, insisting his card kept getting declined and demanding, "I fix whatever you started before things get worse." Gerald's voicemail followed with the same edge he used at Thanksgiving, reminding me that the furnace was making a grinding noise and telling me to call the bank and clear this nonsense because your mother is freezing. Linda's text arrived last, pressing that a fraud hold mentioning my name had ruined their morning and urging me to show some sense, since family cannot function when one person spirals out of control. A line that matched the panic layered in their words. I sat at the motel desk reading the flood of notifications as the heater coughed behind me. And the timing formed its own rhythm because every alert matched the freeze I'd been told would hit linked accounts within hours. The snow thickened against the window while another message from Drew appeared, asking how I could be so reckless if all we needed was a little liquidity to stay afloat. And the phrasing folded itself into the same tone he used when taking the $23,500. The storm outside only made the distance clearer as I opened my laptop to draft an email that would pull their fear toward the door I wanted them to walk through. I began by writing that the motel was giving me time to breathe and that maybe I'd overreacted, letting the softness land long enough to shift the edge of their messages. Then added that my workplace harassment suit had settled for enough money to help everyone if we acted quickly. I explained that I knew about the foreclosure notice and wanted to spare them the fallout by purchasing the Aurora house for $210,000 through my attorney, as long as the closing happened tonight before I lost a tax advantage. I ended the email by telling them the property needed to be vacant by 8 for inspection and that their temporary stay was already arranged. And the cursor blinked with the same certainty that had carried me through the storm as I pressed send. The conference room on the 35th floor overlooked Denver through storm-glazed windows as Gerald walked in, declaring that, the sooner we sign, the sooner we can finally breathe again. And the confidence in his voice carried the same edge he used whenever he believed control had tilted back in his favor. Linda brushed snow from her sleeves while thanking me for setting aside whatever emotions clouded things earlier, because family needed clarity more than conflict. And Drew dropped into a leather chair with a grin, as he muttered that tonight would prove who actually held the family together. I sat across from them, noting how effortlessly their urgency aligned with the foreclosure notice Weber had shown me. And the contrast sharpened when Drew asked if the wire transfer would hit before 9, because we have plans that don't accommodate delays. Weber placed the quitclaim deed on the table and outlined the transfer terms with a measured calm. And Gerald glanced only at the purchase figure before remarking that a deal this generous deserved appreciation from everyone involved. Linda nodded while reminding me that second chances were rare and that a little unity might save more than this house. A line shaped with the same polish she used the night she asked me to wash dishes. I watched the pen move across the page as Gerald signed with sweeping strokes that suggested certainty. And the quiet that followed made room for the shift already forming beneath the surface. The surrender of possession document followed with equal ease, as Linda assured Weber that vacating by 8 posed no issue because the movers are already lined up. And Drew tapped the table impatiently while asking whether we could skip the explanations, since logistics weren't his specialty. The room held a steady hum, while Weber confirmed that all belongings left behind after 8 would default to the put owner. And Drew shrugged as if nothing in that sentence touched him. I let the ink settle, while considering how closely their confidence resembled the messages they sent during the blizzard. And the echo threaded the moment with its own clarity. When Weber produced the affidavit, addressing the $23,500 transfer, Drew leaned forward with a smirk and insisted that calling it payment for consulting was the cleanest way to keep the IRS off everyone's back, shaping the words as though he were offering a solution rather than covering a theft. Gerald agreed with a grunt that efficiency mattered more than technicalities, and Linda murmured that paperwork should never overshadow goodwill. I watched the affidavit take its final form under Drew's signature, and the weight of the document matched the rhythm of the fraud report I had filed in Weber's office. Weber initiated the escrow submission on his tablet, while confirming that funds would remain locked for 90 days due to the tax year cutoff. And Gerald waved off the detail with the confidence of someone who expected luxuries rather than timelines. Linda gathered her purse while noting that the presidential suite would offer a needed reset for all of us. And Drew stood with the satisfaction of someone expecting champagne within the hour. I rose last, letting their optimism fill the room as naturally as the storm outside. And the moment held steady as the elevator doors closed behind them. The quiet left in their absence settled differently when I stepped into the hallway. And the glow from the city lights matched the certainty that their signatures had aligned every piece exactly where it needed to be. I walked toward the exit with the awareness that the house they believed rescued had already begun to shift ownership in the system. And the night air felt sharper when the elevator chimed behind me. I stepped into the lobby knowing the transaction had finished the way the fraud alert began, with a clarity none of them recognized until it moved past the point of return. The storm was still dragging across Denver when my phone lit with a string of messages from Drew announcing that the hotel had no record of any presidential suite, and no one here knows who even made the reservation. And the confusion in his words tightened when he demanded to know where the money from the sale had gone. Gerald's call followed with a sharper edge as he insisted the wire should have cleared by now because a deal that size doesn't just disappear unless someone tampered with it. And his certainty cracked as he added that every card in his wallet had been declined. Linda texted next, asking how escrow could hold everything when you told us tonight was the tax deadline, layering her panic over the same impatience she carried into the conference room hours earlier. I drove toward Aurora as the wind carved through the empty streets, and the headlights washed over the house just as they pulled into the driveway with the frantic energy of people expecting an explanation rather than consequences. Drew stepped out first, demanding that I unlock the door because we have furniture coming in the morning and this can't be some kind of clerical mess. And the urgency in his voice matched the affidavit he'd signed with such confidence. Gerald tugged at the handle, insisting the lock must be broken since this is still our home until that wire hits, grounding his frustration in a certainty that no longer aligned with the paperwork in my bag. I stopped at the edge of the driveway and told them the property now belonged to Granite Ridge Holdings under the possession agreement they'd signed, letting the words land while Linda pleaded that I couldn't possibly enforce an 8 o'clock deadline in a blizzard because family deserves compassion when everything falls apart. The police cruiser pulled up behind me as the officer reviewed the documents and informed them that attempting to enter would constitute trespass under Colorado law. And Drew muttered that this couldn't be happening because we built our lives in that house. I watched the three of them step back toward the snow-pressed street, and the quiet that followed held the same weight as the signatures they had offered so freely hours earlier. The call from the county confirming the investigation into Drew's affidavit came the same week I moved into the Denver penthouse, and the quiet in the new space held steady as I read Linda's message, insisting this downfall was a misunderstanding we can fix if you just listen. I closed the screen long enough to let the view settle across the city, while Gerald's earlier claim that the house would always be ours replayed with a weight that no longer touched me. I stood by the window knowing the distance had finally taken shape, and the air felt different when I whispered that peace was the only inheritance I intended to keep. I'm grateful you stayed with me through this story, and I hope something in it reminds you that calm can rebuild what chaos once held. If you're finding your own way forward, I'm wishing you steadier days and gentler rooms to land in. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.